Hi, everyone. I'm Lana. Thank you so much for joining me. Humanitarian efforts are underway in Gaza as a fragile ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas appears to be holding this weekend. Egypt brokered a deal between the two sides on Thursday. Israeli airstrikes and Hamas rockets killed more than 250 people. The vast majority were Palestinians, including dozens of children. On Sunday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken reasserted the Biden administration's commitment to the region and says the U.S. wants to help rebuild Gaza without restocking Hamas.
President Biden's been very clear that he remains committed to a two-state solution. Look, ultimately, it is the only way to ensure Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state, and of course, the only way to give the Palestinians the state to which they're entitled. Hamas has brought nothing but ruin to the Palestinian people. It's gross mismanagement of Gaza while it's been in charge, and of course, these indiscriminate rocket attacks on Israeli civilians, which have elicited the response that they did, because Israel has a right to defend itself. So I think what's the real challenge here is to help the Palestinians, and particularly to help moderate Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority deliver better results for their people.
The destruction in Gaza displaced more than 77,000 Palestinians. Local officials say reconstruction could take years. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more from the ground.
Hamas celebrated the ceasefire with a victory parade through the streets of the Gaza Strip. They govern Gaza and are classed by the US as a terrorist organization. The conflict has helped bolster the image of their leader, Yahya Sinwar, as the defender of the Palestinian cause. But this doesn't look like a win for the people of Gaza. Israeli airstrikes killed more than 240, according to officials here, including 66 children.
And then over here's this is the reception.
This used to be the Gaza International Hotel. Owned by Afaf Abu Jaber and her family, they built the business up over 25 years, until an Israeli airstrike targeted the multi-story building just next door. There was a warning in this neighbourhood and they got out of the hotel in time. But Afaf's dreams have been shattered.
I don't want to cry, but when I saw this, I'm very cried in my heart.
Israel is also claiming victory, saying it killed over 200 militants. But 12 civilians in the country lost their lives to Hamas rockets, and some Israelis are sceptical. Gonen Ben Itzhak is a former Israeli intelligence officer, credited with preventing dozens of Palestinian terrorist attacks.
I'm just a patriot.
He blames Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for igniting the clashes as he fights for political survival.
And the goal is to keep his position.
Hamas are war criminals, he says, but Israel's actions are helping them.
And I think to myself, what would have happened if I would live in Gaza? I guess that at least I would go to the border and throw stones, maybe become a terrorist, because nobody gives me any hope, nobody gives me any future.
Political leaders on both sides are scoring points, while people in Israel and here in Gaza are mourning their dead and counting their losses. Lana.
Holly, thank you. Elise Labott joins me now from Washington. She's an adjunct professor at American University School of International Service and a columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. Welcome, Elise. This was seen as the first big foreign policy test for President Biden. How do you rate the administration's diplomatic response?
Well, look, I think that, President Biden obviously has a lot of experience in the Middle East with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think at first he was cautious, but I think he did use that relationship to really put pressure on Netanyahu privately. Egypt was really responsible for negotiating the ceasefire. But I think President Biden was wise to kind of leave the diplomacy to others while using his leverage and his pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to keep this conflict relatively slow. I do think at some point they did kind of give the Israelis a little bit of a runway to do the job that they said they needed to do. You could take issue with that. But if you look back to 2014, that was a much longer conflict. And I think the administration was able to keep it much shorter, actually.
You know, you're mentioning 2014, and that was followed by 7 years of relative calm. Do you think that this time might be similar, or that there's differences? In particular, at least I'm thinking about something you wrote, which was that the recent violence seemed inevitable to anyone who was paying attention to the region in recent months. So first of all, start off by just telling us if you think that this peace is going to be lasting in any way.
I think the ceasefire will probably hold. There may be some skirmishes here and there. I think it's going to be really important that both Israel and Hamas kind of look at it for what it is and not go back into a huge spiral of violence if there are some skirmishes on either side. I think you played a little bit of that excellent interview that John Dickerson at CBS did on Face the Nation this morning with Tony Blinken. And I think the Secretary of State said something that was really important. And this is what I wrote about as well, is that you kind of need to change the balance of power on the ground. And you need to kind of look at the leadership on both sides. And when I say that the violence was inevitable, look at what happened over the last few months. President Mahmoud Abbas canceled elections. There was a lot of frustration on the Palestinian part. That, kind of set the table. Then Prime Minister Netanyahu kind of, lit a match with all of those evictions in Sheikh Jarrah, the police firing into the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, violence between Arab Israelis and Palestinians, and largely because of Prime Minister Netanyahu has a very delicate political situation. And a cynic might say that at least his policies kind of laid the foundation for this anger. And then Hamas took advantage of it. So what you need to do is kind of work at all of those areas. And then what Secretary Blinken said, which is really, I think, what this is about right now and why you see a lot of communal violence between Arabs and Israelis, why the Palestinians seem more cohesive now in terms of their protests, which is, I think, we're looking really now at what the heart of the matter is, which is the inequity and the indignity that the Palestinians feel, the situation on the ground for Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, their inability to work, travel. And I think that this is what President Biden is going to be working out right now. I think his comments over the last few days suggest that he has a new, if not appreciation, but a new urgency in terms of creating the conditions not just for peace, which obviously is not in the offing right now, but to calm the situation and make the parties, put them more a little bit, and they're never going to be on an equal footing, but put them more, give a little bit of space to breathe for better conditions on the ground.
And you're talking about the importance of this commitment to dignity and human rights as part of not only a lasting solution in the region, but also President Biden said it's part of his efforts to reestablish America's reputation. So I'm wondering if the U.S. is really going to have an impact on peace and stability in the region, what needs to be done?
I think it's really about two things. He has to deal with the Palestinian situation. The U.S. hasn't spoken to the Palestinians for many years since President Trump moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Palestinians cut off contacts. Then the U.S. cut off aid, they cut off the office. The U.S. is gradually kind of rebuilding those relationships, the aid. I say that needs to, be put on steroids. Like the U.S. really needs to improve the lives of Palestinians. I think that's going to get them to look at their leadership in a different way and say, what is President Abbas really doing for us? He's in the 16th year of a 4-year term. The Palestinians are not getting the leadership that they need to get to be able to negotiate with the Israelis. I think when the Palestinians feel a little bit better about the situation on the ground, that might happen. And that means working with Israel, pressing Israel, not just on reconstruction, easing some of the checkpoints and the travel, and also stopping some of the real extremist violence that's been happening as a result of Prime Minister Netanyahu's political situation. I think that's really what's fueling it. So if you're dealing with the leadership on both sides, then you can kind of create the conditions for more meaningful negotiations going forward. I think what we have, and there have been some interesting things talking about Israel, is that if Israel wants to be a democracy, it's not just about elections, it's about giving people all equal rights. And I think, if you saw what happened with the political situation here in the US, I think that's what President Biden is feeling right now, that progressives and the left and this whole protest movement that we've seen about racial justice and equity is now kind of bleeding into the Palestinian conflict and saying, yeah, we want racial justice and equity here at home. We should also be preaching it abroad.
It's interesting that you raise that point, and I just want to clarify when you say that President Biden, because we do know that he spoke with the leader of the Palestinian Authority, but you're saying that this needs to be something that's happening regularly and not just a one-time phone call. Is that right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that point correctly.
Yeah, look, this administration didn't make any secret, and Secretary Blinken said in his confirmation hearing that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's not much hope right now. It's not really a condition ripe, and so they were going to put it on the back burner. This wasn't a priority. They haven't yet even nominated an ambassador to Israel, and so you don't have that, kind of high-level engagement. You can't just have engagement when there's a peace process, or you can't just have engagement when you're doing crisis management. I mean, this is an issue that the U.S. keeps to, when as diplomatic reporters, we call it tending the garden. You have to keep that high level engagement. And, maybe it's not going to be some highfalutin, peace envoy, but you need to have someone that's working with the parties on the ground. They have to keep pushing the situation forward. It can't be an all or nothing thing. And I think, look, if you take off the idea of some big peace negotiations and you try to create better conditions, maybe in a couple of years, there'll be a better situation for peace negotiations. It doesn't mean that the administration can take its eye off the ball, because we've seen that this tension, this is going to continue to build up, and there will be another conflict if the root causes of how the Palestinians are treated and how they act against the Israelis, and that starts violence unless that's addressed.
All right. Elise Labott, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective.